Welcome back to another episode of The Jews Next Door. I'm excited to share with you my most listened to episode from my other podcast, JEDucation, with my Rebbe, Rav Yaakov Neuburger, who is my Rebbe from YU and the Rav where I live, and which made it a really extra special episode. And Rav Neuburger is known for his incredible personality and his incredible eitzah, his advice, his guidance that he has given to so many, and something that I have personally had the pleasure to benefit from so many times. And now I have the incredible pleasure and the incredible zchus to share that all with you. It's really such an absolute pleasure. This episode was my most listened to episode because it had so many great insights, so many insights into parenting. And therefore I felt, even though it's a different podcast, it was so fitting. How can we not have this podcast gain the wisdom from Rav Neuburger? So if you already listened once, you should listen again. The Chazara, the review is so worthwhile. And if you've never listened, just get ready. Just get ready for an incredible episode. I'm so excited for you to be able to listen to it. And without further ado, enjoy the episode. This week's guest is Rav Yaakov Neuburger. Rav Neuburger is Rosh Yeshiva at YU, as well as the Rav of Congregation Beth Abraham in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Rav Neuburger is widely regarded as an authority on issues related to marital relationships, the purity of the Jewish home. He offers his services to help train young men, get ready for married life, as I had the pleasure and the zchus of learning from Rebbe, my chazan classes. And before coming to Beth Abraham, Rebbe was in, from 1986 to 1990, Rav Neuburger was the spiritual leader of the Jewish community of the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and the Jack T. Wilder Hospital. Rebbe received his smicha from REITs and is a graduate of Yeshiva College and earned a master's from Columbia University in psychology. So I want to just first start off, it's really, for me, it's so special to have Rebbe on. It's Rebbe's my Rebbe. I learned by Rebbe in Yeshiva University, and it's really a zchus to be able to sit down with Rebbe, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Thank you very much.
So first things first, what inspired Rebbe to go into Rabbanos, into education? How did that come about?
So I went in for all the wrong reasons, the reasons that we would not tell people to go into. My major motivation at that time was because I wanted a trajectory in which I would be able to learn as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And learning and then ultimately going to Melech HaKodesh provided that for me. It's not the reason that we would suggest for people to go into Melech HaKodesh. Right. Not at all. For me, I had a lot of siyata d'shmaya, a lot of nisim, and early on in my high school years, so I was in a situation where there were many. I was in a high school that had from students and many not from students.
Mm-hmm.
So then I had an opportunity to have conversations with people, and was in situations where we discussed a lot of Torah. So I did get an inkling that I would I'd have some measure of success in the area.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing.
But again, I went in for the wrong reasons, because Baruch Hu made things work out.
Right.
So things worked out okay.
But it's so interesting because I feel like Rebbe is so involved in, obviously Rebbe is very involved in Limud Torah and is a tremendous Talmid Chacham and devotes a lot of time to learning Torah, but Rebbe is also very involved in the Osek B'Tzarchei Tzibur, and very involved with, both with Talmidim in YU and also with all the Baal Batim in the community. So that's like, it's amazing how Rebbe developed that and does that, with full lave. It's incredible. It's amazing. How did Rebbe develop that? Or is that just over the course of the
malach of Rabbanos and of Chinuch is ultimately a malach of teaching and helping people, trying to help people.
Right.
So
who were Rebbe's role models in I guess first in Chinuch, and then I guess maybe we'll also talk about role models in parenting.
So I had Kadosh Baruch Hu lined up for me a stellar cast of Rebbeim from a very, very early age. Even my Yeshiva Katana Rebbeim are each many were survivors, but each one brought an excitement and a passion and a warmth to the learning. And I, Baruch Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu lined up for me that I was able to interface with, not deeply enough, but with many Gedolei Yisrael.
Right.
So when I was growing up, the Rav of our shul was Rav Nachum Rabinovich, or Rabinowitz.
Right, I've heard Rebbe quote him in the Joshas and the Shir.
Right, and he was a towering figure and a towering Talmid Chacham, and he inspired Balabatim and the kids to achieve in learning, and he was also very, very involved with the Tzorchei Tzibur.
Right.
So he blended his learning with service to the Tzibur, but his one of the great accomplishments he had is that he was able to inspire people to achieve depth in learning. And at the same time, there was a Hasidic Rav in the neighborhood of Nachum Adler, who was always very, very warm and endearing, and also he's a Talmud of. He was a Hasidic Rav, but he was also the Talmud of the Brisker Rav, and he taught us, and I had exposures when growing up. So Toronto was blessed with a cheshek for learning. Even when I was in Bnei Akiva, so the Shaliach Bnei Akiva was the Talmud of Rav Tzvi Yehuda, also quite a Talmud Chacham of Yehuda Felix. So as I went along, and then when I came to Yeshiva, so I had Rav Shimon Ram, who was an Eli from the Mir, and then ultimately I had opportunities to be close with David Lifshitz, but I spent many years learning by Rav Soloveitchik.
Right. It's incredible.
So these were all. I had opportunities to share also from when I was at some point in Eretz Yisrael. So I was able to spend time with one of the Murray Hirav, the Bedats. So because Baruch had a lot of siyata d'shmaya that.
Amazing.
I had was able to spend time and learn from any.
What would Rebbe say is one thing that Rebbe learned from all those amazing different role models, or in chinuch?
Each one was.
Each one gave over something different.
Yeah. Each one had.
What was Rebbe's takeaway from the Rav?
The Rav had two very. The Ravs. When we were in yeshiva, so the Rav was the towering, definitive force on campus.
Right.
And as a result, so learning Be'iyah and learning Lamdas and trying to understand with our learning in a conceptual fashion was the way in which everything was calibrated. Mm-hmm. It was the end all of the experience of learning. So the precision and the conceptualizing of ideas, that became part and parcel of all of his talmidim.
Right.
So that now, at the same time, when one was learning the Rav Shir, so there was a tremendous aura of Yerushalayim.
Right.
Because the Rav had, you're in the Shir, and the overarching concern was the Rav's fealty to the text, whether it was the Gemara, the Tosfos, the Rambam, and to make sure that whatever he said was precise and was accurate. Right. So there were many times when the Rav could have easily presented a shir and we would have been very, very satisfied and very excited. But there were times when in the middle of the shir he realized that what he was suggesting was not didn't satisfy some of the lashonos of a Rambam or of a Tosfos or of a Gemara. So he worked very hard during the shir to make sure that whatever he was teaching was al pi emtas HaTorah.
Wow.
So that sense of Yerushalayim, of not leaving a sugya without being satisfied that what one is suggesting is accurate and is precise and is well founded and is and fits into the language of the Rishonim. So there was an atmosphere of Yerushalayim, which
I feel like nowadays with educators, especially in middle school, lower school, middle school, high schoolers, especially with now today's generation that are very questioning everything, questioning everything in class. It's harder in a way to give over that same Yerushalayim. How would Rebbe advise a mechanech or mechanechet to give over that Yerushalayim in the same way that Rebbe experienced in the Rav Shir? I mean, obviously it's a little bit different. We're not dealing with yeshiva talmidim who are in yeshiva and at that stage of life don't have that same necessarily appreciation. But when one is trying to educate in a high school or middle school, you have to give it over in a way which is trying to win them over. So it's hard to also then accomplish giving over that same year Shemaim at the same time.
I think if this is true for middle school children, for high school, and for yeshiva gadol, and further, that if we would bring everything back to this coming from the Ribbono Shel Olam, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to teach us something. So even when we're doing Parsha Nut and Chumash, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanting to teach us? So that I think that
framing it like that,
yeah,
in every day, or
I would think
whenever
when we finish a sugya, we finish a sugya in Hezek Riyah. So ultimately, we give expression to Chazal were teaching us something, and they were expressing an idea. It's called the talk, and then they rise to talk, and they want us to, whether they want us to achieve certain goals through their halachas, or whether it's a din deiraisa, and we can say very clearly, Kadosh Baruch Hu was being megalis to us. So what everyone's learning to see that as a Kadosh Baruch Hu being teaching us something. We say in the
That's a great point to bring it back and to wrap it in.
Kadosh Baruch Hu is Malamed Torah Lamed Yisrael. Means whenever we're learning, Kadosh Baruch Hu is being Malamed us. That's the Baruch Hu we say. So I think that that sense of awareness of the Ribbono Shel Olam, that's ultimately what Yerushalayim is.
Right.
And then through the various conversations and through the attitudes of the Mechanchim, the Rebbeim. And if Rebbeim Mechanchim come in with a sense of the ever-presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam, so that has to rub off in some way.
Right. Wow. And who would Rebbe say was Rebbe's role models in parenting?
My best role models are my children. My children are much more successful, and my children have an unusual capacity for patience and positivity and optimism. If I would have had them as role models, I would have done better in raising them.
So, meaning Rebbe specifically learned from their patience with Rebbe? Is that meaning in terms of that, or?
No, I mean if I watch them as they're raising their children, as raising my grandchildren, Halavai would be as patient and as good as they are to.
Amazing. What is? Well, I'm sure that they learned it from being in Rebbe's house.
I don't think so. They must pick it up some other place. Maybe from my wife. Maybe.
I hear. So as a Rosh Yeshiva in YU and Rav Shul, Rebbe, I'm sure, and also Rebbe's Talmidim are over the years at this point are more established, and at the next stage of life are involved in parenting. I'm sure Rebbe gets many questions for Eitzah, for various different parenting situations. What parenting issues, I guess, has Rebbe seen in Rebbe's role, and what advice does Rebbe have for ways that parents could be more effective?
The children have to always be aware of that the love and support that parents have for the children is not negotiable, and they always have to have that sense, and that they always have their parents' back. Sometimes an adult child will make a decision which is sometimes very, very disappointing, and the parent has to sometimes discuss it in a very difficult way. That does happen, but overwhelmingly, the child has to feel, always has the parent's support, and that's a non-negotiable parent's love, parent's respect.
How do parents give over that unconditional love?
That when a child messes up, so then that's part of growing up, part of learning things, and supporting and not. And the child always feels that the parent loves them without any question.
Right.
So the parent also has to sometimes apologize to a child if sometimes respect the child properly, what the child needs. And then we have to give our children a bandwidth in which they can be successful. In other words, not to narrow down success and accomplishment in a very narrow way, which may not fit who they are ultimately. To expand the different ways in which a child can feel successful. can be successful in terms of how they accomplish in their own midos. They can be successful in terms of how their friendships that they have. They can be successful in the way that they contribute to the family. So to broaden the different ways that a child can feel entirely positive by themselves.
Right. I feel like for parents, it's very hard because sometimes parents are looking a little bit, not to clone themselves. I mean, obviously parents want their children to be maybe sometimes either a little firmer than they were, or maybe not, or the same way that they are to an extent. How do parents, I guess, refrain from trying to just clone themselves in a way, and then I guess being okay with whatever, however their children come out?
Our avoda is to be b'nei aliyah. So we're always growing, we're always learning ourselves. So I don't think a parent would ever say, I have it so clearly, so accurately, got it so right.
Right.
Because a parent is always growing. A parent is always seeing himself as trying to accomplish more, whether it's in learning or chesed or in relationships with children. So the child senses that that life is full of growth. Mm-hmm. So so that creates, again, a much broader bandwidth. And then every parent appreciates that the child is, I don't think we'd want our children to be clones of ourselves.
Right.
We want to give our children skills, and we want our life skills, and we'd want our children to live inspired lives, and we do want our children to find their own the way that their own kesher to their Ribono Shel Olam, and their particular avoda with the Ribono Shel Olam.
So how do we help them to develop that relationship? Meaning, I guess more specifically, how can we as parents help our children better connect to Hashem when that's hard. It's a hard thing to do, obviously, especially at younger children, and as they get older, as they're especially middle school, high school age, it's where you don't want to force anything on them, but you want to make it as enticing as possible, or as as interesting and as engaging as possible to have that relationship with Hashem. What's the best way to inspire them to that?
I don't know, but I would think that if parents give expression to their awareness of the Ribono Shel Olam's taking care of us. If parents give expression to the depends we have on tefillah. If our engagement in davening is thorough, our engagement with davening is that we walk around with an appreciation that the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that whatever happens, the Kadosh Baruch Hu is determining that, and that our tefillahs have a great sway over what happens to us, and that we give full recognition to moments of when we recognize Hashgacha Pratis. So I think I don't know, if we articulate that we're making decisions based on what's the Ratzon HaBorei.
Right.
Sometimes it's always good to be understated, and it's always good to be to have one's relation with Kadosh Baruch Hu to be a private matter.
Right.
But within the family, I think it's important that that Kadosh Baruch Hu's involvement, or our understanding of what we're doing, is in order to give nachas to Kadosh Baruch Hu, in order to carry out the Ratzon HaBorei.
Right.
So,
is that something that Rebbe often did with Rebbe's own children, talking explicitly about ways?
Probably not enough, but we tried very hard. Probably not enough, but we tried very hard.
And how did I know Rebbe is extremely busy between both of the roles. How did Rebbe devote time to chinuch habanim, parenting and raising Rebbe's own children?
So I probably didn't do it enough. Probably, and my wife was always the keres habayis, and
Rebbe's wife was also working, so
no, she only began working.
She only
began teaching once her children were.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But the work that I have, the roles that I have, So the downside of them is that very often I'm not a balabas of my own time.
Right. Right.
Whether things that have to come up, things have to be taken care of, people need to discuss simchas and things like that. On the other hand, the flexibility of my time is probably greater than in any other trajectory. So whereas my children's friends, parents were able to be with them more consistently, so my kids knew that at any time, almost at any time, with rare exception, I'd be able to rearrange my schedule to.
Oh, really?
And if something came up, almost with very rare exception, so they knew I would be able to rearrange things and be able to come and take care of things.
That's amazing.
And help them out.
That's special.
So I think they did feel that, and they do feel that. I think that our shul was always was doting over the children.
Mm-hmm.
So even though they had a little bit more public exposure, but they also appreciated that they had people they had relationships with Balabatim and
right. No, I see it. I see it in shul. Even when Rebbe's children come back, I get to see the way that the Balabatim interact with.
Right. So that was, and they always had a lot of people giving him good attention.
Right.
So that was.
It's positive, right?
Yeah.
Very nice. Going back to developing that relationship with Hashem and helping our children to do so. So when children are in, I guess, middle school or high school years, how much should we push our children to increase their learning? I guess looking at it from the fact that in school they're already learning a lot, but we also want to try to help them have that chashivas haTorah. This is both for boys and for girls. Should we be pushing? Should we not be pushing? Or if they're already developing some resentment, should we try to give them learning outside of school that could be provide them a certain sense of enjoyment, or is it better to refrain a little bit? And just to add, if that's not the best way to do it by increasing other learning, more learning, is there other ways to show them and give them over that chashivas of Torah?
So I think the idea of encouraging one's children to learn very much depends on the overall context.
Mm-hmm.
If the overall context is that learning is of extreme importance,
mm-hmm.
and the parents are pursuing opportunities to learn as well, so then in that context, if a child is open to it, if a child is resentful, then I would not I wouldn't push those buttons.
Right.
But if a child is open to it, it makes sense to me that a child will only be open to it in the context of that learning is of great significance. And in my own life, so one of the probably the most important shaping influence in terms of the area of learning was the way my father, for him, the mark and the measure of a person was whether he could learn,
mm-hmm.
with the Talmud Chacham or not.
Yeah.
Right? So that was something that we grew up with. Now, we would never do that nowadays.
Right.
Right? That would be, I would never suggest that. But in those days we could do it. They did it. Again, that was, and then as I mentioned before, we had a towering Talmud Chacham as the Rav.
Right.
My brother was very successful in learning in the yeshiva. So,
mm-hmm.
so the entire culture of the home was that that learning is what Rav Wolbe says, hechrichi. It's necessary. It's not a if a family is a culture where learning is hechrichi, we do it because
right.
And at the same time, there's a magic to learning. So at some point, a child feels excited about learning,
mm-hmm.
and if a child sees that people are joyful when they learn, so then they want to be a part of it. And then we use incentives, and we try to figure out how to accomplish with them.
Right.
Rabinowitz was very, very encouraging of encouraging children to learn by choosing small mesichtas and
mm-hmm.
and accomplishing and making siyumim. Again, I'm not sure if that works nowadays. It could be that nowadays the siyum is not so exciting, but but the actual learning and being engaged in the process of learning and feeling choshev. As a kid, if you're in a community where anashim chashuvim learn, right, or if you're in a community where you have young married men who are accomplished in learning. Mm-hmm. And they're spending time learning, and then you can slip into the base of medrash, and you can be one of them. Right? So then
so you're growing up.
That's a choshev thing, right?
So if it's not, if there is either that resentment or it's not, you're not in that type of community. What are other ways that parents can give over that chashivas Torah?
So ultimately, the parent's own life has to
got to model it otherwise.
Right, the parent then it becomes if it's something that the parent is not able to accomplish or not trying to accomplish, then it becomes a child's venture.
Right.
So then that's that. Why should a child partake of that? Mm-hmm. So sometimes you have to involve other people who have not whether a parent can learn with a child or not. Either it goes gangbusters or it's terrible. So either it goes gavaldig and you continue, or you hire someone to take care of the child, to take care of the learning.
Right.
Sometimes you can hire an exciting, cool person to do that. Mm-hmm. And if not, then one waits till the child's ready for it.
Right. And when a parent is learning with their child, at what age would Rabbi recommend starting to learn with children in a more serious way?
It all depends on when the child's ready for it.
And so, if a child's ready, age 5, 6, or
you can say that again. 5, 6 is you can start there, but you also have to. You want to establish that it's not a child thing to do. Mm-hmm. That's so.
What does that mean? It's not a child.
They shouldn't associate with little children. That I did it as a kid. Learning is little kids.
Interesting.
So you have to do it.
How do we avoid that? That's interesting.
But I think I would say early on, one of the great limudim is Chumash Rashi. Mm-hmm. Early on, because that's part of Klal Yisrael's part of Masorah to know Chumash Rashis.
Right. Is that for boys and for girls?
Yeah, for sure,
I feel like people typically say Mishnah. Rebbe's saying more, so maybe Chumash Rashi as a.
I think Mishnah is he said a little bit later.
So what age would be maybe more appropriate for Mishnah?
It's very hard to say. It depends on the child. Depends on the child's mind.
Right.
And nowadays we begin in 3rd or 4th grade. Experiment. You have to see if the child's learning and accomplishing, whether is it.
In terms of certain times, children have a hard time behaving, I guess, the way that we would want them to. For example, especially within the realm of maybe, let's say, minyan, for example. What are some battles that are worth fighting, and what are some battles that are not worth fighting? For example, as one example, but not necessarily limited to minyan. If a child is just really not feeling minyan, really not engaging in shul and tefillah, and doesn't want to go to minyan, is that a battle that you're worth fighting, or not when with regards to raising children?
I think it depends on the age. At an earlier age, when we can, if there are ways of making coming to shul to build good associations, and it's a warm and endearing place, we should try to do that. Mm-hmm. On the other end, a child is in high school. So then, if I don't think that it's worth having, that we should make that into a battleground. Mm-hmm. I think that it's important that the child understands there should be a certain Seder Yom. The person has to at the minyanim frame the Seder Yom, and the parent tries very, very hard that they make it to minyan themselves, and to have conversations with the child. But I don't think that I don't think that much is gained by making that into a battleground. Hopefully, over time, the child will. I think that we have great difficulty in getting our children to appreciate davening.
Right.
One is that davening requires the entire retraining of the way that we train children, because we train children to be excited about being able to read without understanding a word.
Right.
So it's your first grade, second grade, third grade, till you get a little bit of Chumash. Let's say Siddur. We teach Kriya through Siddur.
Right.
So we're excited when the kid can
just
read a passage,
right?
A child can read Birkas Hamazon. We're excited about it.
So why don't we focus more on being able to read? Is it just that that children are not able to? Because if they're able to start reading, then why can't we also at the same time teach them to read with translating and understanding?
I think I'm not sure because that's not my specialty. But I think that reading skills have to be taught and reviewed and probably have to be done in this way. So
right.
I'm not saying that we're making a mistake.
Right.
I think we have to realize that when a kid looks at a siddur, he has been encouraged for years and years and years just to read.
Interesting.
So now we have to. So we're training the children that davening is look at the siddur and that's the book they read and don't understand.
Right.
Then we Baruch Hashem live in a time when children don't feel that they need anything, Baruch Hashem.
Right.
So for them it's hard to connect to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and that they really need the Rebbeinu Shalom to help them out.
Right. Yeah, I have my students say that to me all the time when I'm talking to them about tefillah. They're like, I don't need anything.
Right.
So how do we help both our own personal children and our students to be able to feel that a little more, that dependency in a genuine way?
And so hopefully in a happy way that the children to become more appreciative that what we have we're not entitled to.
How do we give that? How do we in a practical way?
I think if we explain to children that when we have our health, that's a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why we say Asher Yatzar frequently. That's a gift from the Rebbeinu Shalom.
Right.
And that we're in a culture that Baruch Hashem we're not wanting of things. I think that's one of the reasons why Chazal insists that we greet Aniyim at our door and not just have a system where we.
Right.
So it reminds us not to take things for granted.
Interesting.
So we want our children to grow up with a sense of security. We don't want them to feel precarious.
Right.
When you get older, it's a very tough thing to give a child a sense of security and to say that it's happening because Baruch Hu's taking care of you.
Right.
But I think that's something we have to explain to children because Baruch Hu's even taking care of you to the extent that you feel a sense of security. Then other things have to happen. So one of the opportunities that we miss continuously is, and I'm not saying that I have a solution for this, is the concept of having teens minyanim and young adult minyanim and college minyanim. And so a person growing up, the normal thing would be is that you daven in a community with your parents, with adults, with grandparents, with people of all sorts, and you see that there are people who are davening and pouring their hearts out so that they should be healthy.
Right.
You see that people are davening their hearts out so their children should be healthy.
Meaning by having team minyanim, they're just with other teens, and therefore they don't get that same exposure.
Right, they don't see it. They don't see it. I remember many times I remember when seeing people cry their hearts out and davening. Right, so we create these bubbles. And I'm not saying that it's wrong. We have in our own shul also, but by doing that, we're creating such an unnatural context for davening, so they don't really see that.
Right. That's a great point.
The sense of our dependency on the Rebbeinu Shalom.
Right.
It's part of the difficulties of an affluent.
Right.
And Baruch Hashem.
Well, another one of the difficulties of raising our children in more affluent times and affluent communities is how do we not raise them to be so spoiled? Which is it's not just not recognizing, not just not appreciating, but just being very spoiled in general. How do we,
Yes, I don't know the word. You mean the word entitled? You don't mean spoiled. You mean,
Right.
They feel that everything. So there is one of the great challenges that we have not worked out is how if for parents to be able to express their love for the children and without necessarily providing for children everything which children and their peers have.
Right.
So we have my generation also was always so anxious, and maybe correctly anxious, that the children will feel not well taken care of. The children will feel that they're not getting their due, and and the precarious moods of children. So we have a hard time saying, no, this is not a good thing to have.
Right.
You don't. Now, the truth is, as parents, it could be that the adults also don't sometimes, sometimes have understand that they think that they need things which they don't really need. So it could be that it's part of a
they're
more affluent society. They see people,
right.
and the culture is like that. The stores are like that. The amount of choices that a person has, the wide range of tastes that are being satisfied. So so it's the culture is drenched with this idea that
unless if you're saying yes, then I'm not.
But I'm certainly entitled, and I don't get what I'm entitled to, so then I'm being deprived.
So how do we? I mean, our children. It's such a hard thing that parents deal with. I feel like even on an everyday basis within their homes.
Yeah.
How do we definitely don't want our children to feel like we don't love them in any way, or that we want them to feel that unconditional love that we were talking about, but sometimes the answer does have to be no. So how do we? That's
the power of a tzibur. That one of the reasons why Klal Yisrael needs to have a tzibur, one of the reasons why Berovim Hadras Melech is that we can only accomplish these goals and these attitudes if they're supported by a community.
Interesting.
So if a community understands, if we would try to, as a community, walk back some of the levels of entitlement. On a simple level, it's the phones, it's the gadgets.
Right.
So if a community says, we don't need this, we don't need it. Now, we've been largely unsuccessful in that.
Right.
When it comes to weddings and bar mitzvahs, and we've sobered up
I was
going to
say,
now.
what about why can't we? And I feel like maybe in the more to the right communities, they're starting to do certain things, making certain limitations. In the more modern Orthodox community, why isn't there more of a, I guess, conglomerate of the Rabbanim coming together to say, let's try to limit some of these things, let's try to pull some of these things back?
And the reason the Rabbanim don't do it is because it's not wise for Rabbanim to do things that are
push people away.
No. That are going to be unsuccessful and people are not going to listen to. So you have to
pick and choose.
Yeah, because then it creates a sense of that the Rabbanim are insignificant.
Right,
so you have to. But I think that from my experiences in our community over here, we have been walking back the celebrations of bar and bas mitzvahs very significantly.
Yeah.
Very much so. That if you look at the bar mitzvahs, so the average bar mitzvah now is much less of an event than it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Right. Well, COVID also probably.
COVID helped a lot, and we have to build on that the momentum. Weddings have also walked back a little bit. I have to build on that momentum. But it's not the bar mitzvahs and the weddings. It's a culture of
right. It's the overall. It's everything. The clothing and the gadgets and the keeping up with everything.
Right.
It's. I mean, I see it in my school and everywhere. I see it everywhere. It's a lot. It's like a tremendous. It's really.
So that requires tzibur can be disastrous that way because it can encourage, it can feed into this.
Right.
Or if it's tzibur talks amongst themselves and said, so we're going to walk this back a little bit.
Right.
We don't need all these things.
Yeah, it's very hard. Wow, very, very hard. In terms of instilling our children with yira, what's the best way, I guess, to instill them with yira, and is there ever an appropriate time as a parent to raise one's voice?
You mean fear, or you mean awe? You mean reverence? You mean
It's a good question.
So
I guess
it's very, very rare. It's very, very rare that that it's of value for a parent to yell at a child. If a child does something which is unsafe, then a parent has to be right. Rav Olby writes that yelling at a child is first aid. Right, it's the quick bandage,
right?
But it's not an approach. So if a child says something which is offensive, if a child says something which is hurtful, so those are. I think that one of the children of the Chavetz Chaim said that the only time he heard his father yell at him was when he said something that was hurtful to somebody else.
Right.
So that made a tremendous impact. That's what you get yelled at.
That was the one. Right.
So a person picks and chooses, but it requires tremendous training. The parent has to work on themselves. Yeah.
Right. How do we develop patience as parents?
So I think that starts with being married. I forget if it was the Chazon Ish or I forget the Steipler who said that as you mentioned, that patience is the most important midah that one has to acquire and work on during to have a successful marriage. That Kadosh Baruch Hu made Adam and Chava different. Men and women have many different gender differences, and in order to be able to be successful in capitalizing on the gender differences, one has to have patience.
Right.
It has to be, and husbands and wives are different. And in order to be able to successfully build on the strength, so one has to be patient. Things are going to be different than the way you grew up.
Right.
And so part of one of the ways of looking at many of the challenges in Shalom Bayis is that these are opportunities for people to build their own midos.
Right.
So when you get married, it can be in other contexts as well. It can be hanging out with friends. One sees it as an opportunity. There's a great story I mentioned about the Imri Emes. Imri Emes was the Sfas Emes' son.
Mm-hmm.
The Imri Emes was very, very well known for his punctuality and his insistence on time. He introduced timeliness to the Ger Hasidim.
First Yaki?
In Poland. So the story is told that the Imri Emes once came to a train station and the train pulled out. And for him, that was threw off as that.
Right.
So one of the Misharsim said to the Imri Emes, he says, "That's terrible. What are we going to do now?" He said, "Now we work on the midah of Salanus." Right? So that's such an insight.
Wow.
That when certain things happen, so that's an opportunity. Seize upon it. You can work on a midah right now. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Right.
But it's an opportunity to work on that midah. So that's true at any time in life, but it's certainly true in the early years of marriage that one can work on the midah of savlanus, of being patient, being accepting, being open. Then one builds up a certain cachet of experiences where because you were patient, gewaldig things happen.
Uh-huh.
and with children, it's of extreme importance.
Right.
On the ground and big gadol in terms of the trajectory.
Right. I have the tremendous zechus of living in Rebbe's community, and the Rebbe's community is unique. I feel like there's a unique aura of genuine avodas Hashem, and I have no doubt that is all to the credit of Rebbe. How did Rebbe? And Rebbe, I feel like it really inspires and pushes the kehillah to have I feel like with whether all the drushos and especially when it comes to Yom Norayim and really the importance of the genuine and the levidik. How did Rebbe develop that over all the years?
First, I had tremendous siyata d'shmaya, and first of all, when I came to the shul, the first group of the founders of the shul and the core of the shul were all, without exception, extremely nice people, genuine people,
right?
People without egos, they were dedicated and are dedicated to the shul, not because it was important for them. it was important to build a shul for themselves, for their children, to hand over to their children.
Right.
The amount of voluntarism was extremely impressive.
Right.
People took care of the shul themselves. The shul was like an extension of their homes. So in a community where the atmosphere is, it's not for me, it's for the shul, it's for the tzibur, and it's not to service my ego. It's so first of all, that creates an atmosphere of genuineness, of being nice. It attracts more people who are attracted by genuineness and being nice, and there's a lot of room because everybody a lot for their bonus homes, a lot of room for doing good things, a lot from other people.
Right.
So that's the core of the shul, and as a result, the shul always attracted people who want to do things for the shul, who want to be part of it, tzibur, not. And then we had and a lot of just very, very good people we had a very significant number always of Bali Tshuva. So we always had people who were in growth mode.
Right. Wow.
And that created a sense of wanting to grow and wanting to...
Sure.
And then one of the things I learned from as a kid in Rabbi Rabinus shul is you shoot high. You can raise people up if you speak slightly above. Slightly bring them, and then being very open about giving nachas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, about the Ritzon HaBorei. But these things are really things to speak about.
Right.
And then the Yom Tovim, we really invest a lot in preparing for Yom Tov.
Yeah, no, I see it.
The Hachanas for a Yom Tov, whatever it is, whether it's practical Hachanas, whether it's the Shiurim. So when we come to a Yom Tov, the Yom Tov itself has been, there's
you feel it. You mama feel it there. Yeah, no, it's incredible.
Right.
I love it. It's amazing.
Right. So it means being very, very targeted and open and focused on that, before Pesach, everything's about Pesach. Everything's before Purim. It's about Purim. So we come in really prepared for the Yom Tov. They have a tremendous impact. But mostly because people are open to it.
Right.
And people appreciate it. So people wouldn't be open, it'd be very hard.
Well, I feel like it's like if you build it, it'll come. So Ravi built that up to be a place where people are interested, are going to come to that place.
So you have to see. Our Batei Kinesios can be extensions of the of our Batei Medrash of our youth. We get stuck in this idea sometimes that we're b'nei aliyah till we get married and have children. Right. We get stuck in the idea that there's growth, and then and whatever we're gonna accomplish in Ruchnius, it gets capped in the. So that's something that we have to vigorously challenge. Right. We have to see a person's goals are when they're in their 50s and 60s, then they've accomplished in Shas. It's not something you take care of when you're 20 or 30. Right. So it's a lifelong project to be involved in Shas, to be involved in learning. And we have to appreciate that as we go from stage to stage in life, whether it's marriage, raising little children, so those are all opportunities where we continuously see the Yad Hashem, request the Yad Hashem. Mm-hmm. There are opportunities where we demand different things of ourselves. So the idea of continuously growing, midos, continuously growing in our relationships, continuously making tikkunim, right, and not to tire from it, not to be. One of the problems we have is people sometimes in their 40s and 50s they get burnt out. Right. So we have like minyanim for burnouts, which is probably good because then the shuls are the guys who don't burn out. So I often think that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks of us is an enterprise which is so foreign to the culture we live in. Mashal, if in our culture, a person would understand that we can never sleep late. A Jew can never sleep late. Right. It's called Zman Kriya Shema. Yeah. There's no such thing as being on vacation and sleeping late. Yeah. When I was telling my students once that I was like, I don't remember the last time I ever slept past 8 o'clock. They're like, Rabbi, what do you mean by that? I'm like, they're like, even when you were a kid, I said,
And as a kid, I was growing up, I was going to Minyan. Like, they're like, what? Like, they couldn't, but yeah, that's such a, such a very...
And then the idea of being a trajectory of growth, of ruchnistic growth. And the truth, a person gets older, so then they're much more aware of their own neshama, of their own ruchnias. And they do see things differently. And they know what they should take seriously and what they shouldn't take seriously. And so as a person gets older, they do become a more tolerant, a more ruchni. They can become.
Right.
So that again, it's so foreign to the culture that we live in.
Right. Yeah.
But that's what our shuls. It happens in the shuls.
Right. It's very interesting. With Rebbe's background, I mean, I know Rebbe has a tremendous insight, mamish, a real insight into people, and Rebbe's background in psychology. What would Rebbe say is the best way for parents and educators to meet the social and emotional needs of their children or of their students?
I would think just trying to be really, really good listeners, and trying to get. And I enjoy listening to the students talking.
Right.
When we have Q&As, I'd much rather have an A and Q. I'd much rather nowadays. The next door is much more open to having real relationships with their parents. Your door has a much more robust relationship with your parents than we had with our parents.
Why is that?
Primarily because our parents came from a different culture. So that divide we never really negotiated.
That's very interesting.
So the kids always saw kids were always more advanced, not always, but in many things were more advanced than their parents culturally.
Interesting.
One of the great concerns that we have to have as society becomes more technologically advanced is that our children will be more advanced than we are, and then they'll look at us as being on a different side of a divide.
Yeah.
And once they see that, so then they relate differently. Then the conversation not as deep. So I think that one of a moment in my life, which was a shaping moment, was when I was a dorm counselor at YU, and we had a meeting, and one of the dorm counselors, a young man, said, the students really want real conversations. They really want to speak to you. And for me, that was an epiphany. That they're open to talking. They're open to.
Why? Because Rebbe grew up not with that in that culture.
At that time, in that context, the residents, the dorm council was it's a technical job, right? It wasn't schmoozing, and very often we thought that we were a few years older, and some of us were in Tzvicha, and certainly when we were growing up, that there wasn't that sense that parents.
There wasn't that like madrich model that like NCSY has now, like the madrichim who are like a couple years older, who you create that relationship with. That, right. But
the truth that's correct, and people in general, I think, are very open to having genuine, deep, heart to hearts.
Sure.
And so listening to what's going on, I think that's how one gains one's best chance of gaining insight into.
Right. So when you're having those conversations, sometimes there's very tough conversations that you need to have, whether it's challenging conversations, either if they're discussing something with you that's a little more challenging, or if you have to have a conversation with them that's more challenging. What's Rebbe's advice of how to handle those tough conversations in chinuch?
First, you always daven.
Right.
We have ideas. You need Kodesh Baruch to help you get the right words out.
Right.
In the different stages of the conversation, first people have to feel comfortable, and they have to feel respected, and they have to feel that you really want to have a connection with them.
Right.
One of the if the were saying before about how the shul has grown. So part of the relationship that the Rabbanim have with the Balabatim is, and the openness that the Balabatim have is because, and I really learned this from my father-in-law, Chalap, was the absolute concern that the Rav has for the Balabatim.
Mm-hmm.
Balabatim know that if they're going through something that's difficult, something that's painful, then the Rav and Rebbetzin also don't sleep at night.
Right.
And when they have a Yeshua and they have a Simcha, that's the Rav and Rebbetzin have that Simcha as well.
Right.
So when you have that, when people understand that we only want the best, so if we make a crazy demand, if we ask something that we don't always ask for, whether it's davening in a certain way, quiet during the, whatever it is, they know that it's coming from. I think one of the great stories in my life is that when Nosson Tzvi Finkel was nifter, so I was speaking to a cousin who was a Talmud in the Mir then, and he was telling various events, and one event that he said is that he remembers when there was a time when, it probably still goes on today, when there was a league, a sports league that was Friday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's when the boys got out, and that's when they played, and they
Right.
And Rav Nosson Tzvi thought it wasn't right for guys in yeshiva that they should be playing ball Friday afternoon, getting ready for Shabbos. But it was very commonplace, and the Americans did it, and had to get out. So I asked this mishpach of mine, I said, how did the guys receive it? They said they knew Rav Nosson Tzvi was so genuine and so sincere, and they saw the mysterious nefesh he had for learning, that they would never turn him down.
Really? Wow.
So
That's
part
amazing.
of it is that a child has to feel that that the Rebbe, the Mechanech, just wants the best for them.
Right.
And we have to invest ourselves in that they really feel. If they know we want the best for them, so then they'll be much more open.
Right. And when we're dealing with like a challenging child or a challenging student, so what's the best way? I mean, obviously to give them that unconditional love and to make them feel that we really care, we're really there for them. But is there anything else that we should, be aware of that Rebbe recommends as when dealing with?
Those usually are situations that one has to involve some kind of professional as an expertise, and one has to always consider that the child does not want to be the way that the child is presenting themselves right now. The child does not want to be a difficult child.
I mean, there's something that's pushing
going on in
right,
there. Something going on in there. That's not what the child really wants. And if an adult looks at the child and sees the child is really struggling, then they'll look at the child much differently.
Right.
So that's something that's very, very helpful.
Right, very important approach.
And the child wants to be a compliant child. But there's something going on inside that.
Right. So I guess on that note, similarly, what is Rebbe's approach, or I guess what was Rebbe's approach when Rebbe was raising his children towards discipline?
So I don't know if I got it right, but.
Well, I know Rebbe's children. They turned out,
They're different. They had Russian had a great mother. They have a great mother. I don't have any great recollections of any great insights. We always tried to be optimistic and positive.
Mm-hmm.
It was a different kufa. We did hold the kids responsible for certain things.
Meaning different kufa, meaning that it would be difficult to hold children to that certain responsibility.
Now it is different, yeah. Now it is different.
What are the trends that Rebbe's seeing that's different now?
I very often tell a story about Rav Kahneman.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great Rosh Yeshiva, a great fundraiser, a great Jew. So he was once with Rabbi Wine in Florida, and he got a message, and he got a telegram or got a message that the boys in Punovish were on strike. When you're on strike in Punovish, it means you only learn Gemara Rashi Tosfos. Right. So why were they on strike? It's because the food was terrible.
Uh-huh.
So if Kahneman looks at Rav Wein and says, what we would have given in Europe to have what we're feeding the...
Yeah, right.
And then he stopped and he cut himself off and he said, it's a different kufa.
Different kufa, right.
They need different things right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the I don't know if a child now, I don't know. Yeah, that's part of Dor V'Dorshov, to figure out how what a child can handle in terms of being held responsible, in terms of feeling consequences.
Right.
I don't know.
So I guess chinuch nowadays and parenting nowadays is a lot of talk about positive culture and being very positive always.
Yeah, that's been for decades.
So that's right. Yeah. So if what if a parent tries that and it's not going, it's not working. So what do we do when we're dealing with that misbehaving child, or are there any red lines that do require a more severe punishment, or no, we try to just constantly keep that positivity. And
so again, I it's not my field, no expertise.
Right. But I guess from Rebbe's cycle, I know that was a long time ago, right?
A long time ago. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. You have to know the child. You have to know the kufa, whether...
Right. Has Rebbe's chinuch approach changed over the years?
Sure.
In what ways?
My children say that we were much more that with our older children, I'm just trying how they put it, but we were much more I guess they had greater restrictions, put it that way.
I mean, the older children had greater restrictions.
They feel growing up that they'd
meaning that's the sentiment from Rebbe's older children,
right,
saying
right. But there are many families in the neighborhood who've raised children over the course of 20 years report the same kind of...
Interesting. What does Rebbe...
That's the way...
I mean, just the way that the trends have gone.
I mean, we know that over 10, 20 years...
Right.
Children are... Right,
that's very true.
React differently to different things. And whereas a child in one situation is... doesn't project from a certain event that the parents are not loving, and 10 years later they would take that projection.
Right. It's very true.
So the idea of positive encouragement and always finding that's been around since we were married. Right. So that goes back a long time. And to stress that, and to build the children up, but that's also there was a major cultural change in chinuch, probably in the 70s. That where even the classroom changed.
Right.
The classroom was not where the teacher would never, starting in the 70s, teachers would not criticize, but they would always find an angle of what a student suggested to build on it.
Right.
And that continued, and the idea of building children up and building their positive sense of self. And it became a big struggle at some point, is what's the balance between creating confident children to arrogant children,
right.
Confidence and entitled. So that was a very difficult balance.
I feel like that goes back to what we were saying before, is that now children are more and more feeling entitled, and it also is, as Rebbe was saying, nowadays educators are more trying to build up children rather than being, that intense and strictness, and so that probably goes hand in hand in a way.
Yeah. We suggested that it says that Yaakov was an ish Yoshev Ohalim, so some say it was different but midrashim. But I often wonder whether it means that there's an oil of the base of Medrash and there's an ohel of the family. The family is always accepting and endearing, and it's a culture of warmth. And then there's There's another the base medrash for their expectations and when it's challenged.
Right. So the schools that are now adopting the more camp-like approach, I guess.
It's that also to happen maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah. So is that what's Rebbe's feelings about that? I mean, Rebbe's...
Baruch Hashem, we're great mechanchim, so they know what they're doing, and they're producing very, very well. We're doing very, very well. If you look at the overall community, in terms of the percentage of children that graduated in our firm, we're doing very, very well, especially if you compare it to previous generations. Right. So the mechanchim are doing a good job. So they figure things out. So
we're trying. A couple of different questions that I got from some of our listeners and from some of Rebbe's Talmidim over the years. I've been including them already but one or two more that that came from some of Rebbe's Talmidim. So tefillah, as we mentioned briefly, is very difficult, very, very challenging. What are some practical ways that we can make it more accessible for our children? Meaning, obviously, like we spoke about before, that in terms of Kriya, they're trained, but in terms of getting them to develop a real, genuine relationship with it, especially considering what we spoke about in terms of the entitlement, how can we get them to connect with the words more, to connect with the ideologies behind the machshava, behind tefillah more?
So one thing we should be trying is to make people more curious about the text itself. Mm-hmm. Just as we learn a pasuk in Chumash, and then we learn a Rashi, and we see how there's more to the text.
Right.
So when a person is davening, we should be using more opportunities to teach different nuances of the text, so that a person davens looking at the text with a similar eye to the way they look at a pasuk in Chumash.
Interesting.
And to try to develop
kind of like Parshanut, like looking at why does it use that word, or why
exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. No. So what is? Why are we doing this?
Right. Dea Bina Vasco. I like all that. Right.
So that when a person is davening, they're also thinking, and then at some ages we should be encouraging children, if they don't know the Hebrew, to learn to daven in English, right?
Right. At what age is that okay to allow? I guess allow in a way.
Again, it depends on where the child is holding. If we would be successful in getting the child to understand the Hebrew better, then that's the goal to go. But if a child is disconnected with davening, then we should be encouraging with davening in English.
Encouraging them to daven in English completely, or to say, try your best to do it some Hebrew and eventually get back to the Hebrew. But
I would depending where the child is at. If the child is disengaged in davening, do everything in English and start walking back to the Hebrew.
Got it. Interesting.
That'll work. And then a lot of it is the barely bum, as we said before.
Right.
To appreciate. Now, in terms of strategies, there's Revolvi is a great strategy. There's one of the most challenging aspects of davening is getting distracted.
Right.
So he said, when you get distracted, so you stop for a moment, and you introspect as to what is distracting you.
Right.
And you think about it, and then you realize you need the Rebbeinu Shalom to help you on that issue. Right. Hopefully it's not lunch. Hopefully it's something much more serious than that. So that becomes
using it towards the
right.
I remember Ravi sharing that idea in Shir like years ago. Right.
Or to train children that before they start davening, think about what
Right.
What do they need? What are they taking for granted? What isn't going to happen unless the Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to be a part of this?
Right.
How can we move? What are the things that are important for us in life? What should we be grateful for?
Right.
So by having a child just focus on that before they start davening.
Right. Great point. Very great point. Another one. To end off with one or two more questions from one of Rebbe's Talmidim. What are some of the challenges that Rabbanim and rabbinic leaders have that might make it more difficult for their children to sometimes stay more engaged or as engaged? And I guess to extend it a little bit, is what applications to non-Rabbanim can be learned from that?
From what I understand, is that one of the great challenges of children of people in Melechus HaKodesh is that they feel that there's an expectation placed upon them, which is an unfair expectation, and only be placed upon them because of their
family. Right.
So again, there's several ways to look at this. I think it's important for rabbinic parents not to do that, to encourage their children that they are their own people, that they are not pegged or defined. So if it works and it encourages the child, it makes the child more serious and more connected, that's great.
Right. But
if it works against the child feels put upon, and not say, then one has to encourage the child not to feel put upon. It's important for one's talmidim and one's balabatim to see that one gives one's child some breathing space.
Right.
You mentioned before how a Rav who doesn't have control over his time, the way that people, when they're advanced in their career, do have, how that affects the family. So I often understood that if I had to rearrange my schedule to take care of one of my children's needs or my wife's needs, or if I had to interrupt something, or if we had to move myself away from whatever was happening in order to be able to help out a child. So that's what I'm supposed to be doing. That's how the membership, the Balabatim and Talmidim learn.
Right.
This is the priority.
Right.
So I always felt that's not taking away from the Rabbanos.
Right.
It's
meshed with it. Right.
That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Right.
So when it comes to children feeling that they're, we have to work hard to discourage the fishbowl concept of people always looking at them, and it's not always true, and it shouldn't be true, and discourage and work with your child so that they don't feel that they can daven in different places.
Right.
They can sit in the back of shul. They can go to a different community for a Shabbos but also that we don't have those expectations. We feel accomplished if a child comes to their avodas Hashem their own way.
Right.
So that's now how does this transfer out to the broader public? Because this is only a microcosm of what happens in many situations,
right? Where
children feel, do I really have to? I happen to be born into an Orthodox family.
Mm-hmm.
If I wouldn't have been born into an Orthodox family, you wouldn't have this whole package.
Right.
So when I mentioned that to my father-in-law once, he said, "Yeah," and a person who was born into a Rockefeller never complains when born into a Rockefeller.
Right.
So our job is to
make
to
them
say,
feel like this is the Rockefeller.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. So it's true for Rabbanos, to look at the positive sides, and then it's true for Klal Yisrael B'chlal. Right.
That's a great point. Is there any education or parenting svarim that Rebbe would recommend to our listeners?
I mean, the one that's most often referred to as Rav Olby's
opinion. Right.
Sure. Those are well accepted principles.
Sounds good. Okay, Rebbe, thank you so much for.
I hope it's valuable.
It's very, very valuable.
You'll see.
And thank you so much for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it. It's close for me, and I know that many others are looking forward to hearing Rebbe's wisdom. And really, thank you, Rebbe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for tuning in for this amazing episode with my Rebbe, with Rav Neuburger. This, wow. I mean, there's so much to say about this incredible episode. First of all, I loved the idea to stop ourselves and to realize that when a child is challenging, when a child is acting out, they don't want to be that way. And when a parent or a teacher realizes that, they will appreciate that we're working towards the same goal that the child is. And taking that approach, taking that step back is incredible. It's so important. And I also loved how Rav Neuburger explained that patience is the most important midah, most important character trait that one needs to work on in order both for a successful marriage and also how it's so applicable for parenting as well. This episode, as I mentioned, was really, really special for me. And I loved having this exclusive time with my Rebbe, and I hope that you were able to enjoy it as well. It's someone who's such an incredible Talmid Chacham, a true Baal Eitzah, someone who gives such great advice, who has such great Torah knowledge, and to discuss these really, really important topics. And I also loved what we were saying about tefillah. There was so much. There was so much here. I really hope that you enjoyed. And stay posted for next week's episode. We'll have a brand new special guest episode coming your way, and can't wait to share with you. Have a great, great week.